A week is a long time in football. 10 a.m. last Sunday morning, Damien Duff called Neil Doyle, Shelburne co-owner, and within an hour, word had started to spread across the League of Ireland world that big news was stemming from the AUL. Today, we discuss Damien Duff's legacy. 3.5 years, 151 games, the highs, the lows. Was this predictable? Was it coming? And what happens next? And to guide us through this, hopefully to hold our hands and to reassure us all, Donica McKagan is with us again. Dunny, last week you started the show with your quote, "May we live in interesting times." How adequate was that?
I was thinking about that earlier, Andy. How you doing? Yes, to live in interesting times indeed. Could have done with slightly less interesting last 48 hours or so, but here we are. Let it not be said that it is a dull voyage on the good ship Shelburne.
There's a lot to go through, Dunny. We've had so many questions and comments. We had intended to jump on last night, but due to the game and due to the sheer volume, I think giving ourselves an extra few hours just to digest and to let the dust settle is probably the best thing. There's many ways to sum up the Damien Duff era, but would be fair to say it was quite an intense and extraordinary roller coaster. A man who lived on the edge, heart on his sleeve, spoke his mind. At some stage, Sonny, this had to come to an end, but surely not many of us expected it in such dramatic fashion.
That's well put, Andy. Yeah, I think I'd agree with all of the above. Look, he was combative. He was full of fire and brimstone and passionate, and it was a real privilege to have someone so passionate be passionate about the thing that you're passionate about, to someone to be so on your side, and someone who was so well known from his previous life to suddenly arrive in yours and treat it with such reverence, care, love, affection, and seriousness. And like from the very jump, like if you think back to the opening interviews with Johnny Ward, where he gave him the death stare, and there was that whole initial thing between not a sleeping giant, a giant, and all this like right off the bat. 3.5 years ago, he was combustible, he was fiery, and he was like all in on shells. And we've gotten so used to, or I have certainly, feeling like the black sheep a little bit of the Irish sporting public and on the Irish sporting landscape, where you're seen as a bit of an oddball, to be so passionate about a League of Ireland football team. Who do you really support, and da da da. Geez, you're going to another game. Where are you going? Like, particularly during the years in the first division, to have someone of Damien's stature come in and really embrace everything about us and the league and champion it so strongly. It was beautiful, and I'm very thankful for him. I'm thankful that I got a chance to say it to his face at the start of the season. I wouldn't have had any dealings with him really during his tenure, but I'm glad that I was given the mic at the fans forum, and I got to talk to him, and I prefaced it with just saying that I was so thankful for him, and that he gave me some of the best days of my life, and I truly meant that. He was one of one. I've called him a unicorn on here before, Andy, and I genuinely don't think we'll see the likes of it again, not just at Shells, but in the League of Ireland. So there's a lot of ways to read through the ramifications and whatnot, but I think maybe it's appropriate from the top of the show to just be grateful and to thank him for all of his efforts, and everything that he did for Shells.
Neil Doyle, a man who, in my own estimation, continues to grow for his work behind the scenes and what he's done for the club. Neil, I would imagine, was sipping on his Sunday morning latte, having his croissants, and then 10 a.m. approximately, he has a call from Damien, which may or may not be a regular occurrence. He surely didn't expect this sort of phone call, done he? When you consider what's coming up in the next 3 to 4 weeks, is it an over-exaggeration to say that Linfield tie is potentially the biggest tie in the club's history when you look at the financial treasures that could possibly await?
I think it's certainly up there. It's the modern equivalent of, it's this generation's equivalent of the Deportivo tie, which obviously was to get into the Champions League group stages. The equivalent money there probably would eclipse the money we are on the cusp potentially of getting here. But to even get that far in 2004 was nigh on impossible. This seems a lot more pragmatically possible, and certainly what Neil Doyle and co would have been planning for, and they absolutely would have been planning, as you suggest, to have their talisman leading the charge. I'd already heard plenty of media members and so on sort of um, licking their lips in advance of what Damien would say, what kind of, tidbits of salacious content would be coming out of this tie with Linfield, and all of the sort of baggage, for want of a better term, that comes with that. How might it transpire? And I don't for a second think that Neil Doyle, when he saw that it was Damien on the phone, would have expected what came next. Um, no, and from what we've heard, Andy, from Joey O'Brien and from everybody else, all the players and whatnot, nobody was privy to this information. This was a solo run, obviously made in some moments of quietude that he had on his own.
Damien, I think it's fair to say, he seemed to be a man who had that simmering volcano inside him during the week, and it came out in the match nights. On Friday night, Derry were in Talca. Now, I had the privilege to be sitting in the white seats for the first time in many, many years. And it's only when you're up that close behind the dugouts you can actually really hear and see everything. I thought Damien myself looked very tired. Physically, you could see the toll the role is taking on him. And again, that's just my own personal opinion. So that was before, of course, we saw, I think it's fair to say, it was a very flat and a very disappointing performance. But Tony, his comments afterwards, to me, was probably the first sign that there was something very wrong here, because he directed his ire at the players. He questioned their professionalism, how they were preparing for the game on the day. And this is the kind of thing you may have dealt with back in early 2002 when we were losing at home to the likes of Finn Harps, for example. We were new to the Premier Division, still struggling to find our way. But yourself, when you heard that interview post game, what were your thoughts on that one?
I have to be honest, Andy, I didn't have the heart to listen to that interview until quite a bit after the game, into the following day, if not beyond. I felt I took the defeat on Friday quite badly. Those who know me will know that's not unusual, but I just felt that the sort of green shoots that we've spoken about here before, Andy, that we were looking for and so on, that some of which had cropped up away to Pats and so on, that you wanted to kick on at home. And again, it was a real letdown, I thought. That, and again, it wasn't the score. Again, it's a narrow defeat by the odd goal, which again we've discussed here previously about these very, very fine margins in the games that we haven't won. And when I'd seen on my phone that evening and the following day that people were saying, "Geez, did you see the interview? Duff's dead right, this and that." Lots of groups with lots of messages in them. Frankly, I was kind of fed up with that constantly being the narrative myself, that oftentimes, the manager's words or spat with another manager or whatever it might be, sort of handshake gate and all this kind of stuff seemed to be ratcheting up. It seemed to be happening more and more. And maybe that's easier. That's just window dressing when the results are good. When the results are poor and disappointing, I find it quite hard to engage with that sort of material. To be honest, I don't find any succor in it. So I only listened back once the news broke, and it struck me, and I'll use this analogy, although it might be kind of clunky, but it's one I know from professional experience myself, that as a school teacher, I find that if it's come to the point where, we'd have classes of 30, 31 children every year, and if it's come to the point where you're screaming at them, if you notice yourself that you are at the top of your lungs screaming at a room full of students, you've probably lost. There's nowhere to go from there. Um, Maybe once or twice a term, I would argue, at most, you could maybe do that, just to show that you're disappointed, or this is something that completely unacceptable that has happened or whatever, and that might sort of jolt people back in line. But if that's where you're going with any regularity, you've lost. Um, there's nowhere that you can take it from there, and I would try and be analogous with that to where Damien was, where if you're questioning players' professionalism, their application, their aptitude to be a professional footballer, where do you go from there? You can't physically assault players like Brian Clough used to do, or whomever. No more so than teachers can physically assault pupils like they used to be able to do. Um, you can insert there whether you think that was back in the good or the bad old days, whichever you prefer. But it kind of means you've run out of road for me. And look, even in Mark Hoyle's interview after the game last night, he said, when he was asked about that, he said, well, I didn't really pay attention to that because I know that Damien sort of does stuff like that, says things to try and motivate us, which sort of would suggest to me he'd reached that saturation point maybe where it was white noise, and it wasn't getting through. So it's unfortunate. It's a bit unbecoming on everybody's behalf. I think it didn't serve a purpose anyway. And maybe he might have realised that in the cold light of day himself when he thought about things on Saturday, that maybe he felt he had run out of road. And if so, that's sad. He did double down on it in all the interviews, and it's maybe a theme that I don't know if we'll have time tonight, Andy. There's just so much that we could get in to discuss on this topic and others, but I kind of feel that maybe, and look, there's so many maybes right now, but it's not going to change anything. But I feel maybe he could have done with somebody sharing the load with him a little bit. I don't know if after all of these matches lately, and there's been so many goddamn matches, I genuinely feel, again, it's my own hobby horse, but if he hadn't have been hit with these Friday, Monday, and had a bit more time to plan, and a bit more time on the training ground where you weren't being hit with a game every 3 days or so, that this mightn't have come to a head so quickly. But I think he could have done with someone sharing the load to go, you don't need to do 4 post-match interviews after every game. Sit this one out. Or, I'll handle this one. Or, do Alan Reynolds when things weren't going well from earlier at Bowes. He just walked off. He just, like, no interview tonight, I'm off. And the club took a fine or whatever. I'm not saying that's the professional thing to do, but I do feel that he really burdened himself with the entire weight of all of this, and ultimately it got the better of him, I think, Andy.
He was a man who wouldn't accept second best, and that was something that was said both on and off the field. He gave everything to the players, but where his old school demands, Dunny, as you said, probably just running a bit thin in terms of players these days. Now, I'm not throwing anyone under the bus here. This is absolutely not what I'm trying to say. But is there any player in that squad who was quietly satisfied with that news when they went home after training on Sunday afternoon?
Ooh, that's a grenade you've tossed my way.
Well, and as I said, Tony, just to clarify, I'm not trying to try anyone under the bus, particularly, and yourself, so you can pass on that one if you wish. But sometimes after these things happen, things start to come out in the wash. So that's why we wanted to give things an extra day or so. But I shall let
Yeah,
you put your.
I think it's a fair question. And look, let's be real. As a fan base, we absolutely love the bones of him, and nobody wanted him to leave. So as a fan base, even those who were growing a bit frustrated with whether it was the five at the back, whether it was our performances at home, whatever it may be, he had so much credit in the bank. Um, that was almost irrelevant. We probably could have gotten relegated this year, and very, very few people within the fan base would have been calling for his head, which is kind of unprecedented. But within a playing squad, players want to play. Players are selfish by design. They sort of have to be. And if you're in the team and you're getting picked, um, then you're going to have more affection to the manager versus the person who feels that he's getting a hard deal. So, um, I know for a fact that there were players in the squad. You can probably guess who they were, who were in tears, who went home and were absolutely bereft. And then you'll have some who were probably just in shock. And then I think it's probably fair to say there were some who felt like, okay, well, maybe I might have a chance now to impress on whoever comes next, what I can do, and maybe I'll get a fairer shake. So it may have come too late for Ray Tulloch, but there might be some other players who feel that they can maybe sort of reapply themselves and who won't be uh, terribly sad. And look, and that's fair. That's professional sports. Um, it's not a popularity contest, and we've spoken, before on here, Andy, that it's a very much a "what have you done for me lately" league, in every respect, and that's within the dressing room walls as well, I'd say. So look, I don't think anybody was happy, but certainly some players might feel like, okay, reset button, maybe I can make more of my season up to date up that than I have up to this point. Because frankly, let's be honest, I think if you were to name players who make a list who were happy with how their season has gone so far, who were completely satisfied with how many minutes they've played and how they've performed, I think you'd be talking maybe 5 people. I don't think anyone beyond that really would be completely satisfied if they were honest about how the season has gone for them to this point.
Okay, we had loads and loads of questions and comments in, so we have read all of them. So apologies if we don't read them out, but I think we better get some of these questions in, Dunny. Dan Byrne, 3 of the most enjoyable seasons following the Reds, but no one man is bigger than the club. Onward and upward. Cheers, Dan. And Mo Fraser, Morris, thanks, Mo. Shocked by his decision, however, very grateful for what Damien has done for the Reds. The pressure he faced from underperforming pros couldn't have been easy. Wishing him all the best. Thanks, Mo. And here's one more here from Mr. Watson. Not the Johnny Watson, may I add. Best moment was after beating Rovers away last season 2-0 in Tala. The fans were chanting for him. Duff walks over and just tells everyone to calm down. Now, we've seen the Dunny, the League of Ireland family come out from their caves over the weekend, many to bathe in the glory of Duff's departure. Mm-hmm. But he was box office for the league. He truly, truly was. And love him or hate him, he got eyes on the game. He got people talking. And I heard Dan McDonnell again from the Irish Indo saying that every Saturday morning, no matter what happened the night before across the sporting environment, Damien Duff article always received the biggest amount of clicks. That says something. That's a big void for the league to fill.
It is, absolutely. It's a big void for Shelbourne. From a sporting perspective, I think it might prove to be a bigger void commercially and tangentially when it comes to trying to keep people's eyes on our football club. Now we've had unprecedented levels of eyeballs on us during an absolutely brilliant 3 years, and I don't know, we're going to have to be clever about how we try and keep as many of those eyeballs on us and people interested in us. But yeah, um, the league at large is going to feel a sadness, I think. Certainly those in covering it. Um, Dan McDonnell, as you said, I think spoke about it as being like, a real golden age, where I think we all felt in our personal lives and so on, the sort of reflected interests coming from the public, where friends who you've known for a long time, who suddenly started expressing interest in maybe wanting to go to games. People were watching the games on the telly. You got the commercial deals with television, with Rockshore, just an overall improvement in visibility of the product, and constant storylines and content, for want of a better term, coming out, and for better or for worse. It was Damien Duff that, as he said himself, was driving this, and I might again use the metaphor of stars. When he was a star, he is a star, but when stars finish their life cycle, their lifespan, they either go one of two ways. They either fade into cold oblivion, into nothingness, or they go supernova and they explode in a beautiful destruction. And I think I was speaking to Davy O'Connor over the weekend, and he said, "Well, how are people shocked about this? Is there any way that he was going to go out other than in a very dramatic?" He said it was beautiful, and in a way, I could see that as well. He was not going to just fade out. He was going to go supernova, and that's what it felt like on Sunday. And regarding the media and the box room dwellers coming out with the memes and so on, I did think about this when I was out earlier on, that like whatever about the memes coming from other clubs who are absolutely over the moon that Damien Duff has left Shells, because it was must have been hell being them for the last few years. But the meme about when the going gets tough, the Duff gets going, doesn't speak to what actually happened. It's doesn't speak to the reality of what the last 3.5 years have been, and whatever about whoever it is on Twitter or whatever, Anto17249XP, saying that that's fine. But I have to say, I was absolutely disgusted with looking at the back pages of some of the newspapers in Ireland over the last 24 hours, and more than one publication led with that same line: when the going gets tough, the Duff gets going. Like, national publications. And I don't often swear on this, Andy, because I try and keep it PC. But that's a fucking disgrace. And it actually made me like, these are the guys who filled columns, spreads, he's driven so many topics that they've latched onto and wrung every ounce out of over the last 3.5 years. And then when something like this happens and he leaves, instead of giving him his flowers, instead of talking about him in some sort of appropriate way, they resort to the absolute lowest common denominator, insult, which is what it is. So I would suggest those of you who still buy newspapers, have a look at what the various newspapers went with. There was a couple of classier headlines in some other newspapers, and I would make your future purchase accordingly as to who was and who wasn't classy at this particular time.
Thank you, Donny. More questions here. More comments. John Mahan, we'll see the bandwagon fans who will disappear now he's gone. Let's hope not. Sean O'Kelly, players need to shoulder some of the responsibility, but Duff's tactics and formation just wasn't working. Sean, 1895, absolutely cut it. Nothing to say. I'd love to be able to thank him in person. Well, just on that, I've in my previous life being involved with shells in the background. I've met Damien many times, and a bigger gentleman he would certainly never meet. And so just from my own point of view, as a lifelong fan who has the trauma of many dark years, certainly want to thank Damien for all his hard work. There's been a lot of criticism done about this year. You can't hide things. We just haven't been brilliant. Actually, we haven't been good at all, really. If we're quite frank, Damien seems to have tried to evolve the style of play. It's been frustrating, but these things take time. And I've heard it's with Europe, one eye on Europe, trying to make us more suited to those type of games. If that's the case, 2 weeks before this big game against Linfield, that's what I just can't get my head around. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, I'd agree, Andy, that there's certainly it's objectively true that he has tried to change the style that we had effectively for 3 seasons running this year. Um, I'm not sure how, like, he's never come out and said it publicly, like, we're doing this because of Europe. He has said that we are trying to be a more possession based team. We're trying to keep a hold of the ball better. We have better footballers in the building, and we're trying to evolve. And I think all of that is commendable and a totally reasonable aspiration. I think personally, um, I think he's been more driven to match and try and outmatch Shamrock Rovers. I think he's seen the sort of football that when they're um, in their purple patches, that they can play, the sort of dynamic midfield, um, long possession based periods of matches where other teams are sort of chasing shadows, and and the shape that we have resorted to this year would kind of mimic that in many respects. So I think he was trying to lay down a marker to Shamrock Rovers domestically more than, I mean, like, how can you vouch? We could have gotten a much, we discussed it on here, Andy, we could have gotten Stoya Bucharest away. Um, I wouldn't have backed us to come through that tie, um, even in last year's form. And then, you're in a knockout European situation there immediately. So, like, the idea that you would over a 36 league game season, um, adopt and change your whole style for potentially 4 matches seems unlikely to me, and it wouldn't seem like the only reason to do so. So I think he tried to do something that would benefit in the long run, that would make us better on the eye, that would attract more footballers of more caliber, uh, and to evolve makes perfect sense. I think the issue, and it was brought up by one of the listeners there, Andy, that I think doing it all in one go is difficult, and maybe there's some matches where it would suit more than others. Um, we started the season, and we've talked about this ad infinitum at this point. But like the opening of the season, we played 4-4-2, and it was the best football we played all year. That could have been because people weren't available or whatnot, but either way, it worked, and it just showed us that, horses for courses. Sometimes you need to do one thing, sometimes you do another. It similarly, it didn't work when we played 4-4-2 in the third match at home to Shamrock Rovers. After a while, it stopped working, but then he changed it, and we went to 5 at the back, and we had a much more solid second half. So, like, he was fluid from time to time, but there did seem to be this insistence on staying with 5 defenders, despite having no recognised wing back at the football club. We were adapting players to fit that system when we did change it, and despite the fact, again, as previously discussed, that he had a lot of wingers in the squad who now found themselves surplus to requirement due to the shape. So I feel that maybe he got a bit frustrated with that himself, that it didn't take hold as quickly as he would have liked. And instead of like, and it's unfortunate that no one could kind of maybe speak to him in this way and say that he didn't have to do it all in 1 year. And we spoke about it, last week we were being as positive as we could and saying there were so many ways that this season could be a success. There's so many different hues of success in this season, and the FAI Cup is one, a group stage in Europe is another, any means of qualifying for Europe through the league is another. And I think if he hadn't maybe felt so much pressure that like, oh, it's not working, and he's trying to hammer the same system home over and over and it's not taking, and he just got very frustrated and felt that maybe he was out of cards to play. I know for a fact that he wouldn't have been under pressure from above like 99% of managers are. Daniel McDonald explained it very well, I thought, in that podcast that you referenced earlier, Andy, where Damien Duff was basically the inverse of every other managerial situation where the club were scared of losing him. Whereas a manager, as they always say, the one thing you can be sure of is that you will be sacked. Damien was never in fear of that. And he could have played the longer game. And we would have been happy as a fan base and as a football club to allow him to play the longer game. But it does seem that he put himself under undue pressure to deliver basically immediately. And at this point, where it hadn't been working, I wish he had been a bit quicker to concede that, okay, it's not happening right now. There's a transfer window, where we could have gone in and changed things.
And I believe funds would have been made available, Dunny.
Yeah, and look, like that could be up in smoke now for us. In many ways, we can talk, Andy, in time about what the next steps are and so on. But like, again, he would have been an attractive boss to work under and so on. And again, if it took another 18 months or whatever, then so be it. No one would have been screaming for his head or anything like it. So it really is a shame that he obviously the pressure that he felt was pressure that was internal. And again, hindsight is 2020 or whatever, but you would have liked to, maybe if someone had been able to get through to him a bit more and said, you don't need to, this doesn't all have to happen at once. We can build a legacy here. How many seasons is Stephen Bradley at Shamrock Rovers? 7 or 8 or something like this. Like you could do that here. That's what we want for you. So you don't have to rush it. But again, maybe, to go back to the star analogy, maybe the amount of effort and energy that he was putting in was literally unsustainable. And he did seem to make everything combative and very binary, that either it was, love or despair. Everything was amazing. And I die for these guys to, what we saw and heard after the match on Friday. So I really wish that some maybe cooler heads had prevailed, but I think it's clear that some of the tactics weren't working, but that's okay. That happens. That's football. I just wish he'd found a workaround in the meantime until he could eventually get where he wanted to get.
He's most certainly a man on a mission and seemed to be in a rush to achieve, which brought us, as I said a few weeks ago, back to the Holy Land, the Promised Land in last November. Question here from David Hurley. Dave, thanks for your message. In shock, lads, after the departure. Just a quick question. Do you think it was an internal dispute in the dressing room, or was it simply down to poor form? It seems so sudden and quick. I think we've touched on a few of them, Dunny, but anything you'd like to add on that one?
I'd be very, very surprised if it was a personnel issue or a personal issue with players. There are very few players. I'm thinking of maybe 2 off the top of my head who I don't think who could say maybe they haven't been given enough time on the pitch this season to prove themselves. I think everybody else, whether they've been in the team regularly or irregularly, have at some point this season been given several opportunities to prove themselves, some more than others, obviously. But I'd be very surprised if that was it. But what occurred to me more than that was just the sort of frequency of instances that were not football related, that were sort of football related in the sense of adjacent to the match, that kept coming up. I made it just a few notes here on the grassy knoll incident at Bowes. He came out strongly about that and how he thought it was a terrible look for the league. That seemed to really bug him in a way that you mightn't have expected. I didn't expect the beef with Bradley that lasted over two matches. It's the no handshake in Tala at the 2-2 draw, and then being caught on a live mic screaming "no class" and all that sort of stuff. That, silly issues about what they were playing on the stereo in the away dressing room after the game. He went nuts on about the mid-season break, saying it was just a jolly up that made headlines. Then he was on his knees, in Inchicore only a week ago, bowing to the fans, and that made headlines and filled plenty of column inches, and then obviously the last one was a lot of people would have used the term, throwing his players under the bus on Friday just gone. So it just seemed that there was always those things, and I mentioned the very, very first one, the giant versus sleeping giant remark, all the way back at the very, very start, the first pre-season. But it did seem that the frequency of these things were ratcheting up, and the form on the field was poor, sluggish, but these incidents were like happening over and over again and again. It just seemed that he was a bit like a powder keg, and again, possibly if with hindsight, if someone had been able to diffuse that a bit by saying, you don't have to you don't have to answer every question that they ask, or you can be a bit more dull for a while, or send out Joey, or send out Davy Mack,
delegate your support team. Yep,
absolutely. Now he might have been very bad at delegating, and he might. This is his first senior managerial role, and there's every chance that he would use this and take learnings, as they say, from this, and be a better manager for it in future. I know that's a hard prospect to swallow for Shells fans at this moment in time, but it's more likely than not, I would say. And delegation is vital, and I don't think he was particularly good at it. I don't know if people felt, because he's such a big presence, if people felt that they couldn't go up to him and tell him to take a chill pill, and tell him to take a step back, and ask him if he's okay. You were talking about his sort of his body language and so on, and how he looked absolutely spent. A bit of a wellness check mightn't have gone astray, but then who motivates the motivator? He said that before, and when someone is so sort of all powerful at a football club, and someone is very much leading the vanguard at all times, maybe you don't feel it's your role to go up and ask, are you okay? Can I help? It's you, and maybe tell a few home truths about, like, you've been going hog wild in the press a lot lately. Maybe you could do a taking a step back. It doesn't, if that happened, and I don't know if it did or not, but there's no evidence to suggest that it did, because it kept happening. And again, I think that might be something that he'll look back on in time and say that he probably took too much on and took too many things personally.
Comment here from Stephen Lesware Dunny, which is actually quite interesting. Was his bowing in Inchicore a potential nod that his decision had been made, i.e. a farewell of sorts? I think that's what Stephen's trying to get at.
That's a curious one. And
it was a little unusual. Like, fair enough, you just won a big Dublin derby, do what you want. But bowing, and anyway, I thought it was a little unusual, but maybe I'm just reading into it too much.
I think at some point, ultimately in the future, he will come out and clarify a few things. We might end up having to wait an awful long time for it, but I think it will happen. My instinct would be no, but because my instinct would be that he was so he was so binary that we'd come off a bad result and then we dug in and we got a good result, that he was just full to the brim of happiness for the fans to stick with them and stick with the team. And it was a very manful second half performance that day to dig it out. He would have enjoyed that. Um, he didn't strike me as someone. I genuinely feel if we had gotten a result against Derry, certainly if we'd beaten them, he'd still be our manager. Um, so no, I think it might speak to the fact that things were getting on top, and again, as I said, these large displays of emotion in one direction or another were becoming more frequent, which speaks to maybe um, what's underneath the water, if we're going to use the like an iceberg metaphor. Um, but he might say otherwise, but I'd be surprised. But although you might find out that it was something was thinking about even then.
Question here. This is probably question of the week or comment of the week, maybe. 1895 clips. Out of the whole league, Duff needed the glory or the money the least, but he seemed to care about his job the most. Maybe a bit too much. Any fan of any club would have bitten your hand off for the success he's brought to the club, both on and off the field. I don't think there's anything to be gained from blaming players at the moment. I think that's a very sensible and measured comment.
Hmm. Yeah, no
Yeah,
place for that in today's society. No,
yeah.
it was a very, very well-rounded take on the whole thing, and certainly, and like when we would have spoken about Damien Duff in the past, I would have thought it didn't get mentioned a huge amount. Um, but the fact that he didn't need the money is so rare, and again, why I don't think it'll happen. Managers who don't need the money tend to get, but because they've had exceptional careers, and managers who've had people who want to go into management who have had exceptional, careers tend to go to the UK. Robbie Keane has obviously done a different route, but on the whole, they tend to go to the UK. But and therefore, like to bring what he had accrued in experience and in wealth to the League of Ireland to a point where he could have been our manager for 25 years and not needed the money and not had to worry about the sack, um, is highly unusual. And what I loved about, and I think what we all saw happening in real time, not just that he was becoming a huge fan of Shelbourne and how much he wanted to protect the good name of Shelbourne in a very sort of Ollie Byrne kind of way. Um, but he became a fan of League of Ireland football. He became a fan of the tifo displays, the proximity to the crowd. Um, when he pulled Harmo out into the post match huddle, all that kind of stuff. You don't get that at the clubs he would have played at. So I really do feel, warts and all, he did fall very much in love with the league, and he did genuinely want to improve the league, and that's as much of a loss as anything, I think, in the long run. In that this was a guy, largely beloved throughout the nation for his playing career, who was championing the small guy, the forgotten part of the footballing landscape, and ultimately the part that is going to have bigger and bigger significance, and saying, to the public and to the government and to people at large, that you need to pay attention to this and this needs to be better, and we should be ashamed that it's not better. Um, and I really hope in the medium term, Andy, that we haven't lost that voice, because like obviously I'm pretty low after what's happened, and it doesn't feel good. But I think for football, and Shelbourne's place in it, we do need things to keep progressing, and not to stagnate, and certainly not to roll back. And I'm thinking about the academies when I say that. I'm thinking about stadiums and infrastructure on the whole, and like we can't lose this opportunity. And he to have his voice there really, I thought, gave it gravitas. And I hope whatever he chooses to do in the coming months and years, that he might, come back and lend his voice in whatever capacity to that, because Irish football needs it, to be honest.
This may or may not be a fair question, Donny, but has Damien done himself any reputational harm by leaving yet another job? No, I don't think he has, because I'm slightly looking through rosy red tinted glasses. But from the outside, people will say, "Oh, there's Duffer quitting another job." They obviously don't know the nuances of the background to it, but is there potentially people who will have that image of him?
Well, there's certainly. I mean, we discussed it earlier here, that's what the meme is all about, right? That when things don't suit him, off he pops. But again, I said earlier, obviously, as you'd agree with that, that's not what happened here. But there's an element of truth to every stinging comment, and usually, and there is an element of truth to it in that he has left us at a time when we could have, we don't know how this is going to play out. Um, I'm hopeful that it will play out okay for Shelbourne FC, but if it was to not play out well, we might look back at the end of the season and go, well, that was bang out of order, to be honest. It was bang out of order to not tell your own staff. It was bang out of order not to tell the people who are employing you, and to not give us the courtesy of at least seeing out, to the end of the season or whatnot. But ultimately, I think on the back of what he's achieved in the 3 years, he will be inundated, and I mean inundated, with jobs, job offers, all sorts. From media work, I'd say book deals, certainly jobs in the dugout in this country and beyond. I'd say jobs upstairs regarding, director of football positions and so on. I mean, the world will really be his oyster if he chooses to get back in gainful employment in the footballing industry, which I assume he will at some point. But and frankly, he's not the type of guy who gives a shit what you think about what he's done. So, I think if it came up, if you got Damien Duff sat in front of you in an interview in the coming years, and you bring it up and say, "Oh, what is this thing? I do see here that you have a tendency," he would probably get up and walk out of the interview and go, "Well, F you. You obviously don't get it, and you don't get me." So. I think Damien will be just fine, but it is grist to the mill for people who wanted to make cheap shots and so on. But they were doing that anyway, Andy. You know what I mean? He just won the league last year, and people are tagging the club's official post where he has the trophy in his arms, covered in champagne, and they're going, told you he was a fraud. It's like the guy drenched in champagne with the league championship. Yeah. That's the fraud, and like still current champion. So, there will always be those people, but ultimately, I think his time at Chelsea probably enhanced his reputation. So many managers flame out in their first year and don't earn their first job and don't get a second job. The percentage is huge, and if he wants one, will absolutely have more jobs.
Comment from Bernadette Fraser. She's disappointed that he walked away, especially with still so much to play for. But he has made his decision, and we have to get on with it. I think all those years in the graveyard have hardened me. Ah, Bernadette. You may have hardened you, Bernadette, but you're still as glamorous as always. Dunny and I most certainly agree. Now, Dunny, you are a former Shells coach / underage soccer guru. What on earth happens now? Joey O'Brien has a 60-day window. He hasn't got the UEFA A license, and that's all the rage these days. So it'll get Shells through Europe for the foreseeable, if Joey stays, which I think is the plan. Any ideas what the hell's going to happen after that?
Well, it does make that a little bit trickier than you'd like it. All right. I think it might be the pro license he doesn't have. But I think he has made moves to show that he's applied for it, or he's made his intentions known that he does intend to go and do it. So I think even that alone buys you more time, or gets you around potentially some issues. We do have someone with the pro license in the named first team staff. That is also a workaround that you can use. We've seen that happen at Dundalk with Filippo Giavagnoli and his crew of merry men from Italy.
Forza Italia, yeah.
And that was a good time. And so ultimately, I know that the people in the offices at Shelburne will look at the fine print in that and make sure that we're covered. If it is indeed Joey who's going to lead us to the end of the season. And I think that's probably where I would focus my attention right now. Is now I don't know what title you would put on him, and maybe the lack of that pro license might preclude you from calling him the first team manager, for example, going forward if he doesn't have the requisite paperwork. But I think for clarity among the fan base and for clarity among the players, I'm not saying it has to happen today or indeed this week, but I think sooner rather than later it would be helpful that if it is to be Joey O'Brien who's going to lead us forward, and like we need to maybe know, does Joey O'Brien have an interest in taking it to the end of the season? We know obviously he took last night's game and he'll take Friday's game. Beyond that, we don't have information yet. So I personally I think it would be helpful to hear that he is going to stay until the end of the season, and then you can build from there. Davy McAllister is very popular among the players as well, and has a wealth of knowledge. There's a question that would arise, obviously, if Joey is in charge between here and there. Do we need to bring another body in as a sort of a de facto number two? Because I would not, I know that maybe Damien's attention to detail and like jobs that he would have been doing before, like running people around looking for flats in his car or clipping highlights for Sean Boyd of Alfie Inga Haaland's movement, Erling Haaland's movement, not Alfie Inga Haaland, as he moved, tumbled upwards through the air, getting his knee shredded. No, his son, sorry, showing my age. Erling Haaland's movement. You got the kind of feeling that maybe he doesn't do that as much, and there's enough full-time staff in the building now that maybe there was some delegation of day-to-day duties and so on there that was happening. I'd like to think so. I hope so. But I'm just worried about, if Joey was to take it and we don't add to the staff, is he maybe going to get snowed under with day-to-day sort of jobs that previous were being done, but between himself and Damien and the rest. You wouldn't like that to suddenly get on top if he's trying to navigate through Europe, and this is all very new, and he didn't expect this to be on his plate. And that's one thing, that's a hard enough job as it is. But then if he was to be distracted by the minutiae of dealing with all these players and day-to-day stuff of booking buses or whatever it might be, flights and so on that are obviously coming up, you wouldn't know. So I'd like some clarity on Joey's position, and then we have to look at does he need another body in there, another voice, maybe to share the load.
Damien was described as the golden goose of the League of Ireland, Dunny. I've seen that phrase mentioned over the weekend. In a more domestic slash shells setting, is there potential of a negative commercial impact to this now? We've seen season ticket sales go up year on year for the last few years, and no matter what anyone says, Damien Duff has had an impact on that. Will Mossy Quinn, Neil Doyle, et al. Have concerns that there could be an impact in that sense? Jersey sales, commercial deals. It's a much bigger departure from the club rather than just the footballing sense. That's how I would feel about it.
Yeah, I'd certainly have concerns. I think in some small way, the most fixable thing is the football side. And that, we have a very able, experienced, qualified man already in the building, in Joey O'Brien, um, who's a leader of men, who's a very presence that demands respect. And I think even in his brief one match in charge last night, I think showed a lot of nous uh, tactically and so on. So the football side, in some ways, recruitment aside, possibly, um, might be easier to look after than the commercial side. The commercial side, the fans, as you said, season ticket renewals, new season tickets, merchandise, and all that kind of stuff is a bit more nebulous and a bit harder to pin down. It's hard to know sometimes why all of a sudden, players are sorry, fans from the area or fans from wherever are coming to the ground when they hadn't done before. Why people are buying two jerseys instead of one, or giving them to their family members, or why these things are going up. What is the thing that brought them to your door in the first place? So I think the pivot, uh, where my head immediately goes, the pivot from the club's perspective would be, okay, well, we've lost the golden goose, and I think that's a reasonably accurate phrase to use without being pejorative. That we need to look at, okay, well, what can we affect and what can we do better to maybe fill up any potential void that's coming there? And I would say, well, you'd look to the community around Talca Park. That's where I'd start. And we've touched on this before about how previous incumbents in charge at Shelburne haven't utilised the community and the people within it terribly well to get them interested, to feel like their local club is their club. And look, I'd say go, try and get the low hanging fruit. Go to the football clubs in the area, boys and girls. Go to the businesses in the area and push the football club. You can't push Damien Duff anymore. You can't. It's unfortunate you're not going to have him been able to come and talk at your dinners or your golf day or whatever it is. You're going to have to get a little creative. And I think that the heartbeat of every club, as Joey frankly quite brilliantly and emotionally alluded to in his post match with the Shells media team last night, is the fans. And so we can't afford to have huge amounts of fans drifting away. So the club are going to have to be on the ball to not just keep a hold of the ones they've got, but to look at, okay, well, where can we get more people to start coming to matches? And I think I'd start with Drumcondra, the surrounding areas of Ballybock, places on the Dart line, local football clubs, and Marino, and so on. So it can be done, but we might have to try a little bit harder to get to even stay where we currently are.
Before we wrap up, Donny, on this section, it's not that long ago when it was the end of the 23 season, when we were just awaiting the FAI Cup final to see whether we'd go through to Europe. Duff's future was up in the air, and the club basically, Duff, I wouldn't say he took on Ajun Media, but it led to a change of ownership just to really keep him. That itself shows how much he was regarded by by the men at the top of the club and the women. That's something that you could probably say very often. So, Donny, before we wrap up, question here from Ian. What will Damien learn from his time at Shelburne?
I think, as I said, I think to put into his own career going forward, I would hope that he'd learn to delegate more wisely, not to take so much on himself. I think he's learned that there is a nascent desire within this country for local football. There's a huge passion for local live sport. There are clubs absolutely filled to the brim with supporters who are, diehards in every sense. And I think maybe the league itself will leave a lasting impression on him. I hope in the future, as I've kind of touched on before, that he will continue to go to bat for the league. I would love that at some point in the future we could see him return. Um, in what capacity, I don't know. I have a feeling we won't see him as manager again. But obviously, if that were to happen, 5, 8, 10 years, whatever, um, it would be special. I would love to see him maybe come in and help us in some way to further our links in the community, in the wider public, to help with the academy, to use um, his standing that he has now in Irish society to help us. But I think that might be too romantic, and it might be a bit selfish. He's got to paddle his own canoe and do what he feels is best for him. But I certainly think that the time that we've spent in his company and that he spent in ours hasn't been transactional in nature. It's been deep, meaningful, emotional, um, powerful, and moving in both directions. And that I think we gave him a lot, and he gave a lot back, maybe too much. So, um, yeah, I think that it was absolutely worthwhile, and a real golden age that we will look back on forever. I think as Shells fans as being a really, really special time.
Well, if sport is supposed to move you, Donny, I think Duff moved more than a football club. He was an exceptional addition to the League of Ireland. Let's hope we see him back at some point. And from my own point of view, Duffer, thank you for the incredible memories. This is the beginning of the next phase in the club's evolution. So onwards and upwards. Donny, any final words before we have a quick chat about last night's game in the RSC?
Ooh, I suppose again, just to reiterate my thanks to him. I feel that it's not only it was an incredible journey, an incredible ride. Um, to have, as a football fan, all you can really ask for is a club to be proud of, a team to be proud of. It's great when that's led by a manager that you can be proud of. We had that. Um, and for 3 seasons in a row, we got to go to the last day of the season, the FAI Cup final, the incredible run in the following year, culminating in the comeback, the second half comeback in Drogheda, which ultimately got us European football for the first time in the modern times, really in a generation. And then obviously last year, right down to the last 5 minutes. I mean, it's Netflix uh, series worthy. Um, so to keep us, right to the last second of every season, vying for things, competitive, compelling. Um, you don't get that often. You don't get that often. And from where we had come from, on the brink, in so many ways, um, that's my abiding memory, that he brought back just Shells back to the top table, and you can't ask for more as a football fan than to be right there in amongst it, right to the end of every season. So I'm forever grateful for those brilliant experiences.
Thank you, Donny. And of course, in the weeks ahead, we'll be reaching out to Damien. He's more than welcome to come on and join us, but I'm sure he has a long list of media requests. The post Duff era, Donny didn't have much time to reset or go again last night. The Reds were down in the RSC. A much better performance from Friday night indeed, but a point on the board could have been three. Your thoughts overall?
A difficult one, Andy. A difficult one for sure. In many ways, the sort of green shoots that we keep coming back to, that we were looking for on our hands and knees, crawling through the gravel looking for some green shoots lately. I did see quite a few last night, probably more even than you could argue more than the Pats performance, because obviously the Pats performance kind of, it was all condensed into one half, and then it was just sort of grinding it out for another half. So there was a lot of things I did like. But then, as Joey alluded to himself, there were some of the same old failings came to bite us when it came to individual errors. I thought the defending from both teams at times was incredibly poor. I thought we looked a lot better as an attacking force. I thought we created, and we went back. We had 21 shots on goal last night, and we had played, as I'd mentioned on here before, Andy, that in the Shamrock Rovers and Pat's game combined, we'd managed one shot on target. So it was back more to the Shelburne from earlier in the season in many ways. In an attacking sense, Harry Wood outdid himself, and not just the 2 goals, but his contribution overall was magical, exceptional. I heard people were telling me this was the best individual performance they can remember by any Shelburne player ever. Those who were down there, hyperbole FC possibly, but like it was that good that why not? Like, you could he earned a bit of hyperbole. So I don't know. I'm kind of a bit wary of going too over the top, because like when what happened, you could have had a collapse or you could have had a real manful performance, and we did get a manful performance, and the players should be proud of that. And it was good connection between the team and the fans again. I think that's important, because if we conceded rather than scored after a couple of minutes, who knows? You don't know. But we've said that the margins have been narrow, and like we have some very good footballers at the club at the minute, and I was glad to see that they dug in. But we need to see this again. It's the consistency has been the issue. I don't want to think just because I liked what I saw last night on the whole that we're going to go to Galway, a Galway team who lost last night, and suddenly we're just going to, we're going to score a couple of goals there. We'll come back with 3 points. Then we've got Cork at home, fill your boots there against the bottom team, and away we go off to Europe, and well, off to the island of Ireland for the Linfield games. But if we can replicate the good parts of last night, there's no reason why that can't happen. So I think it was a very good start, and sport is unforgiving and does not wait on any man. And we saw that you have to get back on the horse, and there's fixtures to fulfill, and you got to go and do it. So I just hope that the emotion of last night doesn't lead to a bit of a sort of a lag as we go forward, and that this can be something maybe they can tap into. And I think Joey suggested enough to me that I think he might be able to motivate them through this, and there was a lot of respect going both ways between him and the players, and Mark Coyle and himself in the comments after the game. So unfortunate that we're talking about individual errors again for goals. We should have probably won the game with the chances, but I think considering the circumstances, a very good performance.
Well, Donny, I think we'll park the men's stuff there for now. As you said, Galway on Friday, and as we get ever closer to the European Games. Again, we've had so many comments and questions in the last week, especially since Sunday. Thank you to everyone who sent them in, and we'd be very grateful. If you can share the show with your colleagues, rate the show as well. Only takes a couple of seconds, and that helps us in our journey for growth. Donny, there was some very, very sad news last week. The club announced the passing of Alan Murray. Alan, who was the father of Shell's player and genuine legend Noel. Incredibly sad news for Noel and her family. I've met Alan on a number of occasions, an absolute gentleman. And this news puts things really in perspective. Very sad news for the Murray family.
Absolutely. Really, really sad. And I was kind of incredulous when I heard the news because obviously we're as a football club we're still sort of reeling from Aoibhinn Clancy having to deal with her own situation, losing her mother, and then so soon after Noel also losing a parent is really, really difficult. And in many respects, it's unfortunate that on the women's side of things they're dealing with real grief and trauma. That this issue with the men's side is stolen all the headlines and so on, and there is real life hurt and drama going on with an absolute club legend on the other side this week with Noel. So our thoughts go out to the family, Noel and everybody else, and I know that Owen Weirin and Davy and everybody were so taken with how the team and the squad rallied around Aoibhinn, and I know they'll do the same for Noel. Aoibhinn came onto the pitch. She played a part in the win at the weekend, which just shows her mentality. It was a really powerful day, I'm sure, for everybody involved in the team down there, knowing that Noel couldn't be there and the reasons that she couldn't, and then watching Aoibhinn coming on and reapplying herself following her own personal tragedy. So very, very sad. And yeah, and everybody should really take time, I suppose, to reflect on that, and we're using the term grief a lot around the club at the moment. We're all feeling our own sadness around what's happened with Damien Duff and so on. But yeah, there are bigger things in life for sure, and I just hope that Noel and Aoibhinn can get some succor from what the club and their teammates and fans can offer them at this difficult time.
Thank you, Donny. Yeah, indeed. So you did mention last Saturday, Shells away to Sligo again. Second trip in 2 weeks. This time back to the grind, the really important stuff of chasing that league title. Shells just continue to go about their business. No drama. And the wonderful Kate Mooney, another Mooney masterclass. She just keeps getting better, doesn't she?
Fantastic to see. I couldn't believe it when I saw that now brings her ahead of Mackenzie Anthony as leading scorer, because I thought after she scored after a minute and a half, 2 minutes of the opening game in that ill-fated Shamrock Rovers match, but there was a period there after that where it became all about Mackenzie, and Kate Mooney was kind of failing to launch a little bit and became not an afterthought, but you know what I mean. What wasn't chipping in the same way, and Mackenzie was leading the line and getting most of the headlines, but she's kind of quietly gone about her business in the meantime, and bit by bit she's pushed herself to the front of the line. And it's impeccable timing, brilliant to see, because obviously we had Noel score 4 down there last week, Mackenzie. The week before the last game in the All Ireland League, and then Mackenzie's obviously been on the score sheet more often than not. So now to add Kate really just flourishing in her form, I thought her second goal was exceptional, real great team move. Um, so to have her full of confidence, the team full of confidence, I was a little wary of this fixture. I said it on the pod last week, Andy, that these are the ones that you can't take your eye off the ball with, because the letdown of not getting that opportunity to go top outright by playing and beating Athlone. But yeah, far too professional for that. And seeing the chances that we created as well, we could have hit 4 or 5 quite comfortably as well. So really, really brilliant from the girls. And yeah, we keep pushing on now. 2 cup games, I believe, in the next two weekends. So again, all of these trophies are there to be shot for, Andy.
Athlone, as expected, you might say, dispatched Peamount 3-0. So Wexford are hanging on to the coattails, but realistically, it's forming into a 2-horse race. As we said last week, Donny, the fact that the game that was called off due to the weather issues nearly a fortnight or 10 days ago or so, that one is simmering in the background. It's hovering around. It's going to make things very, very interesting as we get closer to the end of season. So as you said, this weekend, the first of 2 weekends in Talca in the Cup, Galway come to town. This is, I won't say the word banana skin, or maybe that is a fair one to use. Galway are no mugs. Shells have had the sign over them in recent times, but this is a game Sean Warren and his team will take fully seriously, Donny.
They absolutely will. I listened to his post-match interview, and I believe he alluded to it directly. And yeah, if anything, you want to focus the mind, I believe they beat Waterford 7-0 at the weekend. So we've mentioned it on here multiple times that the sort of the era of the 7, 8, 10-0 victories in this league were kind of behind us, but there you go. There's a bit of a throwback, and Waterford have been competitive this season. Took us a long time to break them down when I went down there earlier in the season. So they'll know what to expect with Galway. They'll be physical. They'll be well drilled. Their manager will roar like an absolute maniac. Well suited and booted. He's always good for a laugh.
Yeah, Mr. Phil Trill.
Yeah, and they probably consider themselves dark horses for the tournament outright for the cup. So it will focus the minds. It will be a more difficult task, certainly, than I'd say Sligo have provided us the last two outings. So we'll have to be on it for sure. I hope the surface at Talca is back to what it was when the men's team were last playing, and there's no remnants of any lingering issues with the paddling pools and whatnot. But yeah, you'd have to back us at home to win. But I wouldn't be looking at anything beyond maybe an odd goal. We'll have to try and keep them out, and they're a very powerful physical team. So it should be an absolutely brilliant game. The matches between us and Galway in the last few years have been tense, tight, very enjoyable affairs. I'm sure for the neutrals. So people should absolutely try and get along on Saturday and cheer them on, and hopefully all the way to another final in Tala.
That would be brilliant. Yeah, these teams met in the league in May. Shells won 2-1 on Talca that day. Very tight affair, and I think we can expect the same this Saturday. 4 p.m. kickoff in Talca. Would be great to see as many Reds men and women out that day to support this tremendously wonderful team. So, Donny, that was a quiet enough evening. Not too much to cover tonight. I think we got away with it overall.
We managed to get through without talking about shape, which we can maybe leave that for the next one. I'm glad that didn't come up in it. Yeah, look, I said it to you off air, but I was writing so many notes that I ended up just having to tell myself to stop. There was just too many subplots and rabbit holes and so on. So if we didn't touch on it on everything that people wanted to be spoken about, then maybe they could drop us a line. But we tried our best to cover as many bases as we could. It's obviously been a difficult time for everybody. One thing I would say, maybe as a sort of a note to sign off on, a conciliatory note and a unifying note, that there's been in some of the WhatsApp groups I'm in, and the general vibe in the away end last night down in Waterford was one of unity. Unity in adversity. And I said it to somebody elsewhere that in adversity there is opportunity, and I would still look at the season as being full of opportunities for us to get to the end of it and feel that we've really achieved something very, very big. And certainly there's no more. We didn't expect this adversity um, to be thrust upon us, but here we are. And hopefully it's Joey O'Brien and the rest of the guys can knuckle down, and if we were to achieve some of the goals that we've laid out here before that are left to be got in the season, I think it would be super, super special. And I'd maybe urge Shells fans to be patient with one another. Everyone's going to have differing opinions. People are going to be going through different, I know there's people who are angry. There are people who are very depressed. There are people who are hurt. There are people who are looking for players to blame and say, well, if this player had done more or so on. Everybody's kind of coming to terms with things in their own time and mightn't necessarily agree wholeheartedly with your take on the situation. So we might just have to learn to be a little bit empathetic that everybody's struggling, but we'll get through it. And as I said, I hope that the green shoots that we saw last night will grow into something that we can really, really enjoy for the rest of the season. So there's plenty there ahead of us, and hopefully we can reap some rewards as the season continues.
Thank you, Duddy. Well said. Thank you again to everyone who's joined us this evening for this pod. Let us know your thoughts, your questions, and I'm sure when we speak again next week, there'll be even more to discuss, Dunny. So, Dunny, have a lovely week ahead. And lots of football this weekend. If you can, get out to Galway, or if not, do your best to make it to Talca on Saturday. Wishing you all a lovely week ahead. Dunny, good evening, good night. Speak to everyone next week.